Have you ever wondered if you are going to see the end of your story? Is there grace up ahead? Welcome back to the Parable Podcast. And if this is your first time listening, hey, I'm Danielle Zapchenk. I am your host. And joining me today is Tiffany Bluhm. She is a speaker and author of The Women We've Been Waiting For, Pray Tell, and other books and studies. With over 15 years of experience in ministry and nonprofit leadership, Tiffany speaks and writes and leads at the intersection of justice, women's issues, and faith. Tiffany shares today about how God's retroactive grace flourished in her own story.
If I hadn't already known the Lord, I'm convinced that would have been the day I would have found him, because it was just this moment to pull back the curtain and just see the orchestra of my life and see how it was all working for my good.
Here's my conversation with Tiffany Bluhm. I am so excited to introduce you to Tiffany Bluhm. Tiffany was on another podcast that I do, just another one. And I would have to say, Tiffany, you were one of my favorite interviews. Very dynamic, a lot of fun. And I hope that's no pressure going into this one. But thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you. I'm so pumped to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
You have authored a couple different books. You're about to launch your fourth. As a young girl, were you somebody that loved, to write? Or if this is like a new passion of yours, like God has spurred on?
Danielle, I remember being in fourth grade and seeing a blank piece of paper and being so excited that I got to fill it with words. It was my greatest joy. It was such a place of exploration for me. I grew up in a rural town, and I'm old enough that we didn't have internet in our house. It's not like I was getting to explore what the world was like outside of TGIF, And so it was, and Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yes.
So it was really a place for me to come alive and feel like the world was my oyster. And I did Running Start, which in the state of Washington, I'm from the Seattle area. In the state of Washington, if you can pass the entrance exam into community college, you can go your junior and senior year for free. Wow. And I grew up poor, so this was my only path to get my Associates of Arts degree. And I was able to serve as an editor in the English lab at 16. So I did that 16 to 18. So got to read, got to hone my skills. Writing has always been part of the through line of my life. Back in the day when I worked at a mega church, I would write a lot of the Bible studies, a lot of the prayer guides, the missions magazines. So well before I started my publishing journey, but traditional publishing, I was writing all along. And I am an avid journaler, avid journaler.
For your avid journaling, do you keep specific years journal? Is it in multiple different areas of your home, random pages, or you're this is my
it's
one
pretty
track?
Organized. Yeah, it's pretty organized. I'm pretty type A. Okay. I'm all over the house. How dare you? Why would you suggest such a thing? Good Lord. Okay. That just gave me a hot flush just thinking about it. Okay. So I have them in a big bin in the garage currently. I just have so many. My husband's like, what am I supposed to do with these? I'm like, what are we supposed to do with all these DVDs of The Office that we can now stream for free? So I don't know, sir. Let's figure it out together. And there's so many, Danielle. There's so many Sterilite clear bins full of journals dating back to 1996. So it's there's a few.
Have you ever gone back and read those 1996 journals with your kids?
No. What an idea. Oh, Lord have mercy. That feels like a thus saith the Lord thing. That feels holy. Okay. I'm really glad you brought that up. I think I might do that. Especially the ones from my middle school years would be really sweet to read to them. That's fun.
I do like journaling. I wouldn't say as I am consistent. And there are times where I write my notes down and who knows where they are. But there was a specific part of time where I journaled specifically about the boys that I liked, the boys that I was dating, the boy that I was secretly dating, and that my mom read in my journal while I was showering every morning. Thank you, Mom. Okay.
Hey, whoa.
No, it was good because you know what?
Have you brought that up in therapy yet? Because that feels like a betrayal.
Actually, when I first found out about that, which was just years later, I was like, Mom, how dare you? But my mom did it in such a way where she didn't come at me. She utilized that to steer our conversations. And I was like, wow, she's so on point.
Okay.
It was good.
Your mom could work for the CIA apparently.
She could. But also, underneath a mattress isn't that hard of a spot. I could have come up with something else. But me and my daughter, she is 14 now, but we have read through some of that middle school school, high school. Gosh, it's like very romanticized moments of my life.
Danielle,
it's quite
I'm
humorous.
Dying over here.
It's very funny.
Mine are all just prayers. I never journaled about my life per se. It was just prayers. So mine are probably pretty innocent, if I'm being honest with you. No like love triangles or anything like that. I think I'm safe on that.
Yeah.
That
Okay. Yeah. That's so good. I'll just be so interested also to see, like, you know, this upcoming devotional, you talk about like the women who have been a part of our life. Just like to have that for your boys someday, just to see where God has had his faithfulness in your life. And even for you to look back, oh my gosh, like to think of just those moments and those prayers. You know, you said you grew up poor. Did you know that as a child? Or you're like, I was happy with a blank page and just living my life?
Yeah, I would say on one hand, the gift of that was it was a rural community. And so everyone was poor. I don't think I realized how poor, though, that we were. But there was blatant, obvious parts of this where I didn't have food. And I even though I went to a public school, there wasn't free and reduced lunch within that school, which is probably breaking some sort of federal law. And so I never had lunch. And so I would say, and never had breakfast. So I would say I was very aware that like we don't have food, but I think I was more preoccupied with the mental health issues, which obviously I didn't have the vernacular to describe it at the time. You were getting more than you bargained for today, Danielle. I didn't have the vernacular to describe what was happening in the adults in my life to be able to understand why I didn't have some of my basic needs met. And so I was more trying to deal with the erratic behavior versus thinking I'm poor. It was more of like, I gotta figure out how to take care of myself. So buying my own food when I was like in middle school, high school, and buying my own clothes. And I worked for the Department of Ecology. This is interesting. I hardly ever talk about this. I worked for the Department of Ecology when I was 13. And that is picking up crap on the side of the road. We didn't commit a crime to do this, but we were wearing like orange vests on the side of the road. But I remember as like a 13, 14-year-old making like $1,000 a month, being able to save it. So I would say for me, when I think about my story and I think about God's faithfulness and I think about God's retroactive grace, I had so much trouble finding myself in the story of scripture until I found the women who were on the outside looking in and seeing how Jesus was so tender, gentle, and kind and compassionate to them. That for me was everything, changed everything. I remember being 13 and thinking, if this is true, I will give my whole life to this. Everything, every breath, every day will be centered and rooted in the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Would you say at 13, that was when Jesus became more than just a name for you?
It was everything. It was, there was such a clear line. And I know that's so much of puberty and coming of age and being able to handle abstract thought. But being Indian, listeners, if you can't see me, I'm Indian. My name is Tiffany Bluhm. You would never know by my name that I'm Indian. And I was adopted. With the evangelical obsession with international adoption in the 70s and 80s, I am a result of that. And it made this awkward space of not feeling Indian in America. And as an adult, getting to visit India, not feeling Indian in India either. But I felt at home in the kingdom and I felt at home in the presence of Jesus. And so for me, it was finally a place to rest my cultural identity, my ethnic identity, my personhood that had not found an exhale or any sort of resolve before that. And I think that was another reason why. Toggle this, shortly after 13, I was closer to 16 during 9/11, and being brown in a rural community after 9/11 was not great. 10-10, don't recommend. And so it was really jarring. And I'm so glad that I had this steely spine of understanding of who Jesus was, because I think it really would have thrown me. I remember I really digging back in the treasure chest today. I worked at a retirement facility and I was serving food to a bunch of World War II vets, and they didn't want me on the floor anymore because they were so convinced I was going to harm or hurt them, poison them. And so I got to be a dishwasher in the back. Anyway, it was just this moment of realizing that life is rough, life is tough, and God is so good. And you might not have your material needs met. You might not have the things that you deserved. And this idea that God is gentle and kind was a message I could get behind.
Tiffany, I'd be curious when hearing all these pieces of your story, picking up trash, growing up as a young Indian girl in this rural community, being a dishwasher in the back because you were told to be in the back. I mean, that really has shaped your passions and where God has taken you and how you've been in ministry roles and probably just how you mother today. What would you say that your deepest passion is currently?
I would say my deepest passion is women finding themselves in the gospel story and seeing that they are central to it and we move liberation forward and it's in our hands. And I think so many of us count ourselves out. We count out our unique contribution, our unique scars, and we are making history and we are building history and we can serve at the table that wasn't set for us.
I like that you said that our unique contribution and scars, because so many women think, those shameful parts of us. We need to hide those scars. Tiffany, I'd be curious how all of this plays into your parable story that you're going to share today and talk more about this upcoming book of yours. So, Tiffany, if you could, what is your parable story you'd like to share with us?
I would say my parable story started with a really beautiful moment of the woman who took me in at 2 days old tracked me down.
Wow.
And she tracked me down by her daughter. So in New Delhi, her daughter went to college in the States in Minneapolis, nowhere near where I live. And her college roommate from 20 years ago, her daughter's college roommate, reached out to me on Facebook and said, "Hey, my college roommate from 20 years ago's mom thinks she took you in at 2 days old." That's a pretty bold Facebook claim to send to somebody. Yeah. And I said, "Well, what's her name?" And she said her name, Prem Gideon. And I said, "That's her. That's her." This woman had been looking for me for 10 years.
Wow.
And I'm going to get a little choked up. It's just so special to me. 11 years previous to that, I had gone and visited the orphanage, and the people who were currently working there reached out to her, said I came looking and came visiting and just kind of finding a little bit more about my origin story. And she was going to be in the States and she was going to be in the Seattle area because she was visiting her niece. And so we ended up getting to meet up, and she walked in and she said, "Abhilasha," what's the name she gave me. And she said, "All I ever wanted was for you to know the life-saving knowledge of Jesus Christ," in like perfect English, by the way, said that. And I was like, "I do. I love him so much. I love Jesus." And I had my biological son, my oldest son is adopted. I had my biological son on my hip who was the same age when I was adopted. So she got to see somebody who looked like me and the same age that she said goodbye to me after caring for me for just about 2 years and hoping after caring for me from 2 days to 2 years that I'd be safe and seen and known and beloved. And for the first time, she sat me down and she told me my story. And she said, I had been praying. She said, the Lord had put on me an insatiable desire to care for a baby. She's like, I was past childbearing years. Here I am with a middle schooler, but I work at this orphanage and we don't really care for babies. I was like, what's going on? And then months later, you were dropped off on the doorstep, and the Lord said, this is the baby that I've been preparing you for. And she said, I named you Abhilasha because it means desire. So in a land of 26 million orphans, she's convincing me that I was desired and that the Lord was preparing her heart and her soul and her womb to love me well. And so she cared for me. And so hearing this story for the first time, it really was this story of the God of the universe, the divine, doesn't just interrupt and we start walking. We find that the God of the universe applies retroactive grace and presence and has been in the shadows working all along. If I hadn't already known the Lord, I'm convinced that would have been the day I would have found him, because it was just this moment to pull back the curtain and just see the orchestra of my life and see how it was all working for my good. And just thinking of the psalmist telling us goodness literally follows us around all the days of our lives. And just seeing of the people that are planted in our life, that was a woman I've been waiting for. So it was so special. And it really just gave me this understanding that we serve a God of all of our days, not just when we wake up to the goodness and glory of God, but before we even take our first breath.
Yeah. Oh, Tiffany, I think that it's just a tremendous story. Like, I think we all hope for these moments in our lives that we get to see what you talked about, that retroactive grace, because as our human brains, it's hard for us to comprehend. But when, you put the numbers to it, like 26 million orphans, and here's this woman desiring you and not just like letting you go at 2 years old as when you were adopted, but then choosing to continually find you for the next 10 years. It's so beautiful. What do you think about how you've seen that retroactive grace played out in your life, obviously through her, but just like through your story, and how that has weaved so much into who you are?
Yeah, I would say as an adult, seeing even just the hardships we talked about earlier, those were just, I mean, you said it, they forged and formed me, and seeing those as God's goodness and the resilience that built. And I will say, I have a pretty sunny demeanor, and just seeing even God's grace in that, to be able to handle things by the grace of God and for the grace of God, and seeing God's hand as part of the answer and not the problem.
Yeah.
I know so many international adoptees, adult adoptees, the suicide rate is 4 times higher, substance abuse issues much higher, deal with a lot of trauma, because it's one thing to be domestically adopted. There might be a way for you to still be in contact with your family or know them or track them down. That is not afforded to most international adoptees. So this idea that you have been plucked from your motherland and your first place and first culture and transplanted in a place that's not your own, and you're supposed to like it. One of my friends who's adopted, her therapist told her, adoption is the only trauma you're supposed to be thankful for. And the idea that, you know, there's 2 stories and they're both true. One, that I was adopted into a home that by people who desired me. And then there's also the story of I was ripped from my first culture and my first place and my first family. Those are both true stories. And so that cognitive dissonance there is very real. It's very real to process, and to process it as soon as you realize you're brown and your parents aren't.
What was that like, that journey of like really understanding, accepting your Indian heritage and making it a part of your life? Because, you know, when you have white parents, like sometimes people try their best as adoptive parents, but besides just like cuisine, like there's so much more, you know? So what was that journey like for you to start on this like embarking moment of incorporating that into your life?
I would say not until my 20s. I had the opportunity to go to India twice for 2 weeks at a time. So total a month, over a span of a handful of years. And I would say only after that did I really reckon with what it means to be Indian American. And there's no wrong way to be Indian. So I think for me, and my son's Ugandan, and so kind of reckoning with there's no wrong way. You know, I always tell him there's no wrong way to be Black. Like you get to own this and be who you want to be and present yourself to the world. And it doesn't have to be any prescribed identity, but it is an invitation to be proud of who you are. And so for me, when I say I grew up rural, Danielle, girl, I did not meet another person of color until I was 13. And then I didn't meet another Indian until I was 18.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And so it was, how do you be proud of something you don't see celebrated? And so I would say my mid-20s started to have more interest in even cuisine is one of the greatest ways to connect with culture, but also, you know, customs and norms and celebrations and festivities and holidays. I would say every year we get closer and closer as a family, as an individual. Music, what I'm reading, it is very much informed by the celebration of South Asian culture. And I love it. It's my favorite thing about me.
Because you were adopted, was that always a natural choice to, I also want to adopt? What was that like for you as your family, you're choosing adoption for yourself?
It definitely did not play into my desire to adopt. It very much felt like in prayer one day, I felt like the Lord gave me an image of who my child was. And it was so crystal clear, high def 4D. And then kind of we followed that through and we're obedient to that. And it has not been easy by any stretch of the imagination. But here we are. Send me, Lord.
We've only been talking about 20 minutes, but I just feel like, gosh, it is so cool to see the tapestry of how different pieces of your life have woven into this moment. Even as we are recording this, your book, The Woman We've Been Waiting For, a 40-day devotional for self-care, resilience, and communal flourishing. Gosh, you just like see all these things weaving together. Now, you've authored a couple different books, but why now a devotional? Why did you feel like this was the moment for you? You
know, it's interesting. That is the number one question I have received during interviews and press. And it has come to my attention that devotionals have a bad rap.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But they're usually associated with a bit more flowery writing. And that is definitely not my goal here. And people are going to have a rude awakening if they're looking for some flowery writing in this work. But I was inspired by Common Prayer, not the book of Common Prayer, but Common Prayer by Shane Claiborne. And there's a few other contributors to that. Just this daily reckoning and identifying what happened in history that day with a passage to meditate on and a liturgical prayer. And I loved the cadence of that. It was really inspiring. So as I thought about my next work, I wanted to write about women in history, which all of my books are very much women in history, history in general, and how it plays into culture and justice today. And the idea of getting to do that with a multitude of angles and not feeling like I'm having to zero in on one idea, forgiveness or reparations or, whatever it may be. But the idea to kind of weave these all together for a holistic life was the driving force. And then I was able to invite some contributors, the women I'm listening to contribute to it. So every 3 to 4 entries, you're going to hear from a guest, contributor, which is really, really beautiful. I love that. And I was excited that my publisher was like, yeah, let's try this. Let's see what we can do here. A little back and forth there, but they caught the vision for it.
I mean, yes, I have heard that about devotionals, but the most recent devotional that I've read is Cat Arma. Cat Armas. Am I saying it correctly?
Cat Armas, and it is.
It's more, it just takes me out of a different place to really understand and really dig in. I mean, it was so interesting how she brought in all these different things. And when you talked about, not seeing someone who was Indian until you were 20 years old, when we kind of just isolate ourselves or just kind of stay in the same bubble of oh, this is what my friend is reading, or, or just this is what my church, says this would be a great devotional to read, just to see what else is out there. And so when I saw even your cover, how you talked about communal flourishing, I see that as this devotional of here's this celebration of so many different women, so many different voices. And let's just continue to foster this growth in understanding each other and utilizing culture and the lessons and the scars, like you said, that we have walked through just to bolster us up. Nona Jones, she said in a previous interview, when she writes books, she writes them because this was the book she needed. And I'd be curious if this is when you think of yourself, back as the dishwasher or even early at 20, was this the book that you needed?
Oh man, this would have changed the game. Absolutely. I really echo what Nona said. I wrote the book I wanted to read. I wrote the devotional I wanted to read, and it is the intersection of history and women's liberation and faith and justice and all of the things I'm so very passionate about. And for me, Danielle, I would say I'm really over identifying women in scripture by their disadvantages first, rather than assigning them the agency that they felt in their time and place. And so you look at Vashti, who comes onto the scene before Queen Esther, but they worked in tandem. They both stuck to their principles, and they both really had a very different kinds of leadership, but really stuck to their guns and stuck to their boundaries. And I wish we would be celebrating Vashti as a woman who stuck to her boundaries. Or we think of Rahab. The first thing we think of Rahab is she's a prostitute, rather than she's the breadwinner for her home. She took care of her kids. She was a matriarch. She grafted herself into the lineage of Jesus. There's so much more to celebrate here, and there's so much more agency. And so when I talk about writing a book that I wanted to read, it was one that does not mark women in scripture and women in modern history by their disadvantages, but first by their advantages.
That's so good. Since you were able to pull in different writers, was there anyone that you were just I don't know, I'm going to ask her, just see what happens? And she said yes, she was excited that you're just so tickled that she joined your...
These are all people I feel comfortable being hey, you want to do this? So I was... I was so pumped. I'm just such a fangirl of all of them. And they all bring activists, clergywomen, therapists, scholars. It is such a beautiful and liturgists. So there's such a great group of women that said yes.
Yeah.
That it was like, hey, come join the squad. It was I know you want to do this.
Just one of the excerpts that I was able to read was about self-care. And you really like turn that on its head, because there are you said like, it is not bubble bath and just like face masks, there's so much more.
It's not a purchase.
And this quote really got me. It says, self-care is living as worthy of respect and rest simply because you exist and not because you've accomplished something extraordinary to deserve such an existence. And I think so many, I would say for myself, so many women think that, okay, well, if I just accomplish this, then I will have self-care, or it'll be added. And you just talk about like, we are all worthy of that. Was that a struggle for you at any time in your life, or self-care, like that's been something very mindful, but you've worked on it throughout the years?
Oh, I'm so excited to unpack this, Danielle. I literally have chills. Okay. So anecdotally, I want to talk about broad stroke culture here, but an anecdotal example as well. I would say I'm a people pleaser, and I want to follow the rules. And the way Western culture has conditioned women to follow the rules and do their part and show up and work really hard and not expect any advancement or being paid well or any of the things that we hope to do. So I think for me, it was like, wait a second, here I am at midlife. I cannot continue spending myself on everyone else and everything else without first taking care of myself. So that's for me personally. And I think too many of us identify self-care as self-indulgence and as treat yourself culture. And like you said, bubble baths, face masks, yoga retreats, all of these things. That is not what we're talking about. And you laid out my definition of self-care. It is seeing yourself as worthy in a place and space that does not. And not because you've accomplished anything to deserve it. And so it is boundaries. It is identifying what you will and not accept. It is having a holy imagination for what could be in your life and inviting others to see you as worthy rather than you hoping and believing that something might change without you inviting a different point of view. And so I think for me, this has really been my life story of understanding, okay, taking care of myself is not indulgent. It is not the antithesis of the gospel of self-denial, right? There is a measure of self-denial in our walk with Christ, of self-sacrifice, but it is not at odds with self-care. It is not. And so I really dig into so many women in the Old and New Testament to show you, look at how they took care of themselves. Look at how there were non-negotiables and how they were going to live their life and how they invited others to treat them and coexist, and how they painted a new society, community in place because of their commitment to self-care.
I am a people pleaser as well. I think I'm growing from that spot.
Just hard, isn't it?
It is so hard. It is so hard because you're like, why do I care so deeply about like this person I just like met at the gym, which has no relevance in my life, but I'm like, let me serve you in this moment. It is something so difficult to break.
Yeah. I think for me, my people pleasing comes out because I fear their wrath. It's just based on my family origin and my experiences in adolescence. I'm so afraid of what they might do to themselves or to me that I'm like, no, I will follow the rules, hoping that if I do what you told me to do, you're going to do what you said you would do. And so there's this exchange that I'm hoping, because my adrenal glands can only take so much.
You used the word holy imagination. What is that for you?
Ooh, I would say inspired by the Holy Spirit and rooted in the gospel. And it's a liberative view of what could be. And it's painting that picture. Maybe we haven't seen it. Maybe we don't know how we could make it happen, but we're slowly moving toward it and we're slowly inviting others to see it. A great example of that I feature in the devotional is the mothers from St. Augustine Church in Oakland, California in the mid-60s. And they were tapped by their pastor to start feeding little ones before school, to feed them breakfast. And fast forward, it goes to chapters all across the United States of the Black Panthers, of the mamas of the Black Panthers. And the FBI deemed it the greatest threat to American democracy. Feeding children breakfast before school.
Wow.
History records that in the Chicago site, police came in the night before and peed all over the food. And so people are scrambling to try to get more food, get it ready. And it wasn't like crap. It was grits and oatmeal and eggs and fruit and really, really nutritious food. And the idea that they had an imagination for what it could look like to care for the children in their community in such a small way. And it changed the face of our nation. After Congress shut them down, they went to Congress and they said, well, then you do it. You take care. And because of those mamas and because of them putting pressure on Congress, over 13 million children have been fed free breakfast today.
Wow.
The holy imagination.
I think that is why, like, this book, this communal flourishing, this is what happens when we understand, we actually take the time to listen. Yes. And whether we're learning history or we're hearing that from the generations before us, and really digging in deep of asking, like, okay, why? Like, understanding, like, what was their heart behind it? Gosh, it is just so helpful just to take that moment, because we are just in this go culture where either we just don't do that for ourselves and then just apply that. And out of this, like, self-care, you really change this aspect of, like, it can be social justice. It is like, how do we change that? How do we change those for future generations to say, yeah, we aren't conditioned to people please or so many different other assets. Yeah. What is your hope, really, when the woman is done reading this, maybe even just one day, that just, like, sparks something in their holy imagination, if you will? What would be your hope for that?
I would pray that they would, gain practices to root them in the way of the Lord. Just daily, from breath prayers to affirmations, just daily rooted practices that can keep them and root them and center them in the presence of God. The magnificent refuge, Teresa of Avila calls it. And then secondly, I would hope that they would, as you said, connect the dots from self-care to social change, understanding that identifying what you need and what wholeness looks like for you, moving past survival, but to communal flourishing. What does that look like for me? And what does that look like for the people in my community in this time and place in history?
Well, Tiffany, I'm so excited because really I have heard from many authors in the past, when the book launches, it is literally like a birthing process. It is like you have put your heart and your soul into it. And I just want to say, well done. Like, it is
that so
a journey. And you kind of just, like, when you were talking about as you're a little girl, like, it was this blank page, like you just don't know where it's going to go and how many people is going to touch and change their lives. But just like what you've shared with the story of the woman that you took you in, like, eventually, like, that retroactive grace is going to come back over and over. So thank you so much. If people wanted to get connected to you, what are the best ways that they can do that?
Oh, well, let's connect. I love this plan for us. Obviously, I'd love for you to dive into The Woman We've Been Waiting For, available wherever books are sold. But you want to visit my site, there's all kinds of resources, free resources there at TiffanyBluhm.com. And then for the everyday, I hang out mostly on Instagram. Awesome. I'm a little spicy, though, so just trigger warning. Buyer beware.
Little spice never hurt anybody. Okay.
Never hurt nobody.
All of Tiffany's information will be available in today's show notes. Tiffany, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me, Danielle.
Wasn't she great? To check out Tiffany's book, The Woman We've Been Waiting For, or to connect with her, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Tiffany. And actually, she wrote the first one. Number 1, how do you define self-care? And maybe this is a time to just make a simple adjustment or recognize, like, how far you've come because of this act of self-care. Number 2, how can you invite holy imagination into your prayer time and into your conversations with God? Maybe you've already done this and it hasn't even had, like, a name before, but this is just a way that you can really deepen that relationship and that connection with Him. Just a huge shout out to my husband, Eric, for editing this podcast today. I am so grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God's grace can show up retroactively. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.